I used to believe the most brutal crimes came from strangers, until I heard my daughter-in-law whisper in the kitchen just behind me. The shipment's tonight organs cleaned out by 2 a.m. I didn't speak. I just stood there gripping the trembling tape recorder in my hand. The man performing those illegal surgeries was my son, a renowned surgeon, a devoted father, a cold-blooded traitor. If you think this is just another ordinary family story, you're wrong. Subscribe now and prepare for a story darker than anything you've imagined. It was always the sound of the clock that marked the beginning of her evenings. A faint, deliberate tick echoed through the wide halls of the Langley estate in New Haven, a house that on the surface exuded warmth and elegance. The kind of home that might be featured in glossy magazines filled with mahogany floors, expensive candlelight, and a dining table that never sat fewer than 6. But beneath the varnish of wealth and routine, there was silence. A silence that Martha Langley, 68 years old and recently widowed, could feel crawling under her skin. She had moved into the house 3 months after burying her husband Harold. A quiet, snowy January, Isaac, her only son, had insisted. "It's too much house for you alone, Mom," he'd said over the phone. "Emily would love to have you around." Jenna agrees. She remembered holding the phone to her ear in the empty living room of her old home, her husband's armchair still indented as if waiting. Maybe it was grief or hope or desperation that made her say yes. But she had packed up 4 decades of memories and come. The house had a guest suite on the second floor, decorated with minimalist, taste-clean beige walls. No clutter, everything in its place. It felt like a hotel. There were no family photos, no scented candles, no indication of Martha's presence, except for one small suitcase tucked neatly in the closet. She never unpacked all the way. Downstairs, dinner was being prepared. Jenna moved like a shadow, precise, composed, unsmiling. Isaac was already home from the hospital, reading something on his tablet by the fireplace. And in the kitchen, barefoot on the tile, little Emily was standing on a stool stirring cookie batter, her cheeks dusted with flour. Grandma Emily had called out, waving the spoon, grinning. "I saved the last chocolate chips for you." That moment, brief, beautiful, made Martha's heart ache in a way she couldn't explain. She bent down to kiss her granddaughter's forehead and stirred the bowl with her. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and rosemary roast. For a moment, it almost felt like family. Almost. Dinner was served at 7 sharp, always. Jenna was meticulous with timing, with portions, with table placement. Isaac liked routine. He claimed it was the only thing that kept him sane after 12-hour surgeries. And Emily, well, Emily had learned to sit straight, chew quietly, and speak when spoken to. That night, as they all sat around the oval dining table, Martha observed in silence. She watched the way Isaac barely looked up from his phone, how Jenna asked Emily about school without once glancing at her, and how Emily responded with short, careful answers. "How was your science test?" Martha asked, hoping to inject some warmth into the cold formality of the meal. Emily's eyes lit up. "I think I did good. We had to draw the organs." "Did well," Jenna corrected without missing a beat. "And let's not talk about organs during dinner, sweetheart." Emily shrunk back slightly, her fork tapping gently against her plate. Martha's smile faded. It wasn't that anyone was cruel, not outright, but there was something suffocating in the air, something unspoken. Later that evening, long after the dishwasher had hummed into silence and the fireplace burned low, Martha sat in her room. The cassette recorder, an old Sony model from the 80s, lay in her lap. It had belonged to Harold. He used it to record patient notes back when he still ran his private practice. She hadn't used it in years, but tonight it felt necessary. She pressed the red button, the tape wheels turning with a faint hiss. "Emily," she said, her voice steady but low. "If you ever find this, if someday I'm not here and no one is willing to explain why, I want you to know something. I tried, I really did." She paused, staring at the pale wallpaper. The room was quiet except for the recorder. "I thought moving in here would help, that maybe I could be useful or at least welcome, but sometimes it feels like I'm furniture, invisible, decorative. You know, darling, people say that aging is like slowly disappearing, but it's not. Disappearing is quiet. This is loud. You feel it in every look, every silence, every time someone forgets you were in the room." She stopped the tape. Her hands trembled as she slipped the cassette into a drawer beneath her nightstand. The next morning began the same way. Coffee already brewed, breakfast already served. Jenna poured Emily's juice. Isaac read the Lancet on his phone. Martha quietly buttered her toast. "Are you going out today?" Jenna asked, eyes still on her tablet. "I thought I might take Emily to the library," Martha offered. "She has piano at 3 and ballet at 5. No time." "I could pick her up from ballet," Martha suggested. "We've got it handled," Jenna replied, smiling too thinly to be real. "You just enjoy your retirement." It was the kind of smile that closes doors. After breakfast, Martha washed her plate. No one else offered to help. Emily hugged her goodbye on her way to school, whispering, "Can we do cookies again next week?" Martha nodded, trying not to tear up. Then when the house was empty, she sat by the window and watched the driveway. The black SUV pulled out, Isaac at the wheel, Jenna beside him. And then the silence returned. A part of her wanted to call her sister in Vermont. Another part of her wanted to scream. But instead she walked over to her room, opened the drawer, and pulled out the cassette again. She pressed record. "I'm starting to see cracks," she said. "Small things. Like the deliveries that come after midnight. The calls Isaac takes in the garage. I know it's none of my business and maybe I've watched too many crime shows. But something's not right. And when I ask questions, I get that look. You know the one, Emily. The look that says, you're old, you're tired, you're imagining things. But I'm not." She stopped the tape. Her breathing was shallow. It wasn't just the isolation that haunted her now. It was suspicion. But even that would be easier to bear if she didn't feel so disposable. Later that evening, Isaac mentioned they'd be hosting a dinner for colleagues. "You'll have the upstairs to yourself," he said. "We just want to keep it intimate." Martha nodded. "Of course. Of course." And when she was alone again in her beige room with no family photos, no framed memories, no warmth, she sat down beside her old tape recorder and whispered into the microphone. "They think I don't see them, but I do. They think I don't hear, but I'm listening. Every word, every whisper." Then silence again, but not inside her. Inside, something had shifted. It was no longer grief that filled her chest. It was vigilance. And in that moment, Martha Langley, former nurse, mother, widow, realized she was not just a guest in someone else's house. She was a witness, and whatever came next, she would be ready. The first time Martha noticed the basement door was locked, it didn't seem suspicious. Houses like these, old, large, filled with hidden nooks and odd angles, always had rooms that stayed closed. Especially in a family like this where structure meant sanity. Jenna had once said, "Emily's safety is our highest priority," as she wiped down the granite counter for the 5th time in one afternoon. So naturally, a basement full of tools or chemicals or storage didn't feel like the place for a curious 10-year-old. But something about the lock struck Martha as odd that morning. She was in the laundry room folding towels with the meticulousness born of years as a nurse and mother. The dryer buzzed and she pulled the load into the basket when she noticed the light under the basement door flickering. Not steady, not normal. Someone was down there. She walked over, tugging gently at the handle. It didn't budge. Locked. Not a bolt from the inside, but an external digital pad. A biometric scanner with a backup key code. That wasn't just a basement, that was secured access. Before she could think further, Jenna's voice echoed from the kitchen. "Martha." Martha straightened. "Just getting the towels." A moment later, Jenna appeared in the hallway, wiping her hands on a linen napkin. She looked down at the basement door, then at Martha. The smile on her face didn't reach her eyes. "That's locked for a reason," she said flatly. Martha offered a light chuckle. "I figured, just curious. Saw the light flickering. It's dangerous down there. Chemicals, sharp tools, medical supplies." Jenna's tone was clipped, not quite hostile, but something colder than indifference. "Please don't try to open it again." There was a pause, just long enough to hang in the air like static. Then Jenna turned her ponytail swinging with calculated grace and walked back to the kitchen. Martha stood there for a beat longer, eyes fixed on the keypad. Dangerous. To whom exactly? That night she watched from her bedroom window. The Langley house sat on a slight incline with a curved driveway that disappeared behind a row of well-manicured hedges. Past midnight, 12:22 a.m., according to the antique clock by her bed, headlights flickered across the far end of the window. A car, not the SUV Isaac drove, a black sedan, low to the ground, no visible tags. It pulled up the side of the house past the garage. She waited. Minutes passed. Then a silhouette moved. Isaac, wearing his coat over scrubs, emerged from the side entrance and greeted someone at the back of the car. They didn't talk long. Isaac unlocked the side gate, and together they carried something long and wrapped in plastic through the entrance to the lower floor, the basement. She couldn't see much more, just the dull thud of the door closing, then silence. The black sedan disappeared as quickly as it had arrived, leaving no tire marks, no trace. Martha didn't sleep that night. At breakfast the next morning, Isaac looked exhausted. His eyes were bloodshot. He barely spoke, nodding at Jenna when she mentioned Emily's piano recital, grunting when Martha poured him coffee. He didn't touch his toast. Martha watched him closely. "Rough night?" she asked casually. Isaac glanced up, surprised she was even speaking. "You could say that." "Late surgery," she offered. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Something like that." She said nothing else, but he didn't look at her again. 2 days later, it was Mr. Howell. Martha saw him every week for months. An older gentleman in his late 70s, gentle voice, sharp mind, retired history professor. He had colon surgery last fall, and Isaac had taken his case privately. Every Tuesday at 2 p.m., Mr. Howell would sit in the sunroom off the waiting lounge of Isaac's home office, reading the newspaper, sipping water from a glass he brought himself. Polite, constant. Then he was gone. The following Tuesday, the room was empty. The vase on the end table still had fresh flowers. The magazines were arranged neatly, but no Mr. Howell. Martha thought perhaps he'd missed the appointment. But the week after, he wasn't there either, nor the next. Something gnawed at her. One afternoon, while Jenna was out with Emily and Isaac was still at the hospital, Martha wandered into the sunroom. The receptionist wasn't there. Her shifts had been cut recently, Jenna had explained, so the room was quiet. The patient ledger sat neatly on the edge of the desk. She opened it. Names times check-ins. Mr. Howell's name stopped on the second week of February. No notes, no cancellations, no transferred. Just gone. She closed the book and walked back to the kitchen, tension growing in her chest like a stone. That evening, during dinner, she asked, "I haven't seen Mr. Howell around lately," she said. "Is he doing all right?" Jenna didn't look up from her salad. Isaac didn't pause his chewing. There was a beat of silence, then Jenna spoke. "He's been transferred." "Transferred?" "To another facility," Jenna said, her tone clipped and mechanical. "Someplace with more intensive aftercare." "But I thought he was improving," Martha said. "Did something happen?" Jenna finally looked up. Her eyes were sharp, expression unreadable. "Why are you asking?" "I was just concerned. He was kind to Emily. She mentioned him." Jenna's mouth curved into a tight smile. "He's not our responsibility anymore. Where he went is confidential. And frankly, Martha, I don't think we need to explain every detail of Isaac's practice to you." Martha felt the room constrict around her. Isaac didn't say a word. Jenna wiped the corner of her mouth with her napkin. "Don't worry yourself. Mr. Howell is being handled." The word handled sent a chill down Martha's spine. That night, she sat on the edge of her bed, her fingers hovering over the recorder again. She pressed it. "They're hiding something. And not just from me, there's something off here. About how they speak, how they don't speak, about what's behind that door, about why Isaac is up at midnight. And now, Mr. Howell is gone." She paused, her voice catching. "Emily deserves better than this. I don't know what I'm seeing yet, but something is wrong in this house. And I think it starts in that basement." She stopped the tape, turned off the lamp, and lay back in bed. But she didn't sleep. The hallway outside her door creaked around 3 a.m. Footsteps. Slow, measured. They didn't stop at her door. They went down the stairs. And when she crept to her window again, she saw the black sedan back again, idling in the driveway, engine purring in the dark. The basement light was on, and the door was still locked. Under the filtered light of a late Thursday morning, Martha stood in the kitchen with a dish towel in her hand, listening. Jenna had left to take Emily to her ballet class. She'd be gone for 2 hours. Isaac was at the hospital, or so he said. The house was quiet, cloaked in that peculiar stillness it wore only when completely empty. No footsteps, no hurried whispers, no piano scales drifting from the living room, just silence. Her eyes flicked toward the basement door. The digital lock blinked green left, unlocked, a rare occurrence. Whether by mistake or carelessness, Martha didn't know. But her heart began to beat harder, a slow thump that filled her ears. She moved toward the door, her hand hovering over the handle. She didn't allow herself to think. She just opened it. The stairs creaked beneath her weight. Each step down into the dim hallway felt like stepping deeper into a truth she wasn't sure she wanted. The air changed to cooler, drier, tinged with a chemical tang. Half antiseptic, half metal. The basement was large, larger than she'd imagined. It wasn't cluttered or dusty like the basements she'd known in the past. It was clinical, controlled. To the right, a full-sized industrial freezer hummed quietly. Its metallic door bore a digital readout of internal temperature, 18 C. On top of it sat a clipboard blank. The floor had been recently cleaned, so clean it gleamed under the flickering LED light above. In the corner, a rolling surgical tray. Scalpel sets, a vacuum-sealed pack of gloves, 2 stainless steel basins neatly stacked. Across the room, 3 wall-mounted cameras, small and unblinking their lenses, aimed squarely at the operating table at the center. Not a workbench, not a storage area, an operating table. Martha's breath caught in her throat. There were no dust covers, no signs this was unused or abandoned. This was current, maintained, actively functional. She stepped closer to a set of drawers, slowly pulled one open. Inside, IV lines, tubing, surgical tape, labeled and categorized with color-coded stickers. Everything sterile, everything ready. In the corner sat a large white bin with biohazard tape partially torn. She didn't dare open it. Her hands had begun to tremble. Then footsteps, soft from above, the unmistakable creak of the 3rd stair from the top. Martha froze, listened. Nothing more, no descending steps, no voices. Perhaps the house was shifting in the wind, or perhaps someone had returned. Either way, her time was up. She climbed the stairs quickly, carefully closing the basement door behind her, heart pounding so violently she thought it would burst. She didn't breathe again until she was back in her bedroom, sitting on the edge of her bed. And then she shook. Not from cold, from knowing. That night, while folding laundry in Emily's room, Martha asked softly as if nothing mattered. "You've been quiet lately, darling. Is everything all right?" Emily nodded, sitting cross-legged on the bed, flipping through a coloring book. "Just tired." Martha hesitated then. "Did something happen at school? Or with your dad?" Emily shrugged. "Daddy was acting weird yesterday." That caught Martha's attention. "Weird how he had this red stuff on his doctor coat," Emily said casually. "Like a big blotch on the front. I thought it was paint or something, but he said it was just ink. He changed shirts before Mom saw." Martha stopped folding. "Did he look upset?" she asked carefully. "I don't know, he was kind of jumpy. Like when the doorbell rang, he spilled water. And he said not to tell Mom because she gets stressed." The girl said it innocently, not understanding the weight of her own words. But Martha felt it settle in her stomach like a stone. She nodded, smiling gently. "Thanks for telling me, sweetheart." That night, Martha returned to the tape recorder. Her voice was quieter than before. "I went down there, into the basement. I saw the set up an entire surgical room under the house, cameras, tools, and that freezer. I don't want to know what's inside, but I think I already do." She paused. Emily saw blood on Isaac's coat. He lied, called it ink. And I believe him not because it was true, but because he said it so easily. He's lying with ease now, with practice. Over the next week, Martha watched more carefully. She tracked who came to the house, a delivery truck at 3:15 a.m., a woman in a white coat who never came to the front door. She listened through the air vent in her room where soft voices traveled up from the office below. And then on a Tuesday afternoon, while putting away Isaac's medical journals, she found it. The book wasn't particularly special, a hardcover volume on surgical techniques thick and untouched on the surface, but it was heavier than it should have been. She opened it. Inside, hollowed out between the pages, sat a stack of folders bound with elastic bands. Thin patient files, each bearing a name she recognized: Mr. Howell, Mrs. Denner, Michael Tran. All had been patients of Isaac's. All had transferred. She pulled out one at random: Mr. Howell. Inside, initial consult notes, a diagnosis, post-op evaluation. But no discharge papers, no signatures, no insurance billing records. She checked another. Same thing. All of them, without exception, ended abruptly, like someone had erased their last chapter. Martha held them in her lap, eyes burning with the knowledge she didn't want. And then a sound: Isaac's car pulling into the driveway. Panic flared in her chest. She shoved the folders back into the book, slipped it under her mattress, and straightened the pillows. Moments later, Isaac appeared in the doorway. He looked tired again, not exhausted, just empty. "Hey," he said, "you okay?" Martha turned. Of course. He nodded as if that was enough. Then he paused. "You've been spending a lot of time in the office." There it was. His tone was casual, but his eyes were too sharp. Martha smiled lightly. "I've always loved books." Isaac didn't smile back. "Some things in there are confidential." She held his gaze. "I understand." Another pause, then he turned and walked away. That night, she didn't record anything. She just sat in bed listening to the silence that now felt filled with danger. The pieces were no longer scattered. They were forming something clear, something horrifying. It started over lunch. Innocent enough, grilled chicken quinoa salad. Martha's attempt to bring a touch of simplicity into a house that had become cold with precision. She had prepared it herself, placing each plate carefully on the long oak table. Isaac was already seated, scrolling his phone with one hand and stabbing at his food with the other. Jenna was in the living room on a call. Emily, thankfully, was at school. Martha sat across from her son. For a while, neither spoke. Then she folded her hands in her lap and looked up, her voice quiet but firm. "Isaac," she began, "I've been worried. About Mr. Howell, about Mrs. Denner. And now I find Michael Tran hasn't been seen in weeks." Isaac didn't look up. "Patients transfer all the time, Mom." "But I've checked," she said gently. "There are no records of those transfers. Not in any official database. No discharge notes, no contact from their families." His fork paused halfway to his mouth. He finally raised his eyes, hazel bloodshot, ringed with exhaustion. There was a flicker there, something raw. Maybe guilt, maybe fear. "I don't know where you're getting this," he said flatly, "but you shouldn't go digging through things that don't concern you." Martha nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch. Then she said, "What's in the freezer downstairs?" His mouth opened slightly, but no words came. He blinked slowly like he was buying time. "You've been in the basement." "The lock was open," she replied. "Accidentally, I assume." "Mom." "Isaac," she interrupted gently, "you used to be a boy who cried at the sight of a paper cut. You hated dissecting frogs in school. And now I find an operating table under your house, cameras on the ceiling, surgical tools next to a freezer." Isaac stared at her. "I'm not accusing," she continued, her voice trembling despite herself. "I'm asking because I want to believe you haven't become someone I wouldn't recognize, but it's getting harder." Before he could answer, a sharp voice sliced through the moment like a blade. "You don't get to ask those questions," Jenna said, stepping into the doorway. She hadn't been in the kitchen 5 seconds ago, but now she stood there, arms crossed, face carved from marble. "This is not your house," she continued. "You're a guest. You do not snoop. You do not interrogate. And you certainly don't have the right to know about Isaac's professional affairs." Martha turned slowly to her. "I'm his mother." Jenna's mouth curled into a thin smile. "And that's supposed to mean what? That you get to play detective because you feel underappreciated." Isaac shifted in his seat, tension radiating off him like heat. "I found patient files hidden in a hollowed-out book," Martha said, eyes on Jenna now. "Names of people who are missing, names your husband saw last." Jenna stepped forward slowly like a cat preparing to pounce. "I'm going to say this one time," she hissed. "You are not a doctor. You are not law enforcement. You are an aging, lonely woman who's desperate to matter. You don't have the context, the knowledge, or the permission to be in those files." Isaac didn't defend her, didn't even look up. Jenna's voice dropped even lower. "And if you keep pushing, you'll find yourself somewhere very isolated." Martha stood, her heart pounding but her back straight. "I'm not going to be threatened in my own son's house." Jenna raised an eyebrow. "Then I suggest you remember your place." The room fell into a deep, charged silence, and then without another word, Martha left. But she didn't go to her bedroom. She waited until nightfall. The house was quiet by 11. Isaac and Jenna had retreated to their bedroom after a long, tense silence at dinner. Emily had fallen asleep hours ago. Martha sat in the dark of her room, the old cassette recorder in her lap. She stared at it, her thumb hovering over the red button. But she didn't press it, not yet. Instead, she stepped into the hallway and padded barefoot down the stairs. The kitchen was still, the air slightly chilled. The refrigerator hummed. The only light came from the oven's digital clock. She crouched behind the long granite island just beyond the threshold of the dining room. And she waited. At 11:47 p.m., she heard footsteps. Soft, controlled. Jenna entered first, whispering. Isaac followed. "We can't delay this shipment again," Jenna said under her breath. "We're not delaying," Isaac replied, his voice tense. "I just don't like the new guy they're sending. They said he's Turkish intelligence unofficial. He handles the money, you handle the product." Martha froze. "We need that wire transfer by Friday," Jenna continued. "And you need to make sure the organs are properly sealed this time. Customs nearly flagged the last one." Martha's mouth went dry. Her fingers clutched the edge of the island. Isaac sighed. "Do you know how hard it is to get a clean liver out of someone without damaging adjacent tissue? This isn't just snatching kidneys from the black market. This is surgical grade." "Then be surgical," Jenna snapped. Isaac poured something, maybe wine, into a glass. "I never wanted it to go this far," he muttered. "Well, here we are," Jenna said. "You wanted the practice, the house, the reputation. That costs money, real money. And unless you have a better way to bring in 6 figures a month, shut up and keep cutting." Martha's knees buckled slightly, but she held herself up. "I told you my mother was a problem," Jenna continued. "She's sniffing around, she's in your files, and she's smart. Too smart." "She's not going to do anything," Isaac said, though, without conviction. "Are you sure?" Jenna asked, "because she's already been in the basement." There was a pause. "If she talks," Jenna added coldly, "she could ruin everything." "She won't," Isaac said. "She's too scared of losing Emily. She's also a mother. You remember what they're capable of when cornered?" Silence again. Martha had heard enough. She backed away slowly, returning to her room with footsteps she could barely feel. Once the door was closed, once she was alone, she picked up the recorder. And this time she pressed the button. "They're harvesting organs," she whispered, "shipping them overseas." Isaac and Jenna. They spoke of liver removal, of surgical technique, of sealed product, of a man from Turkey facilitating payments. Jenna threatened me, said I was a problem, said mothers are dangerous when cornered. She's right. Her voice cracked. "I don't know what I'll do next, but I know what I heard, and now I have it on tape." The next morning, Martha stood in the hallway, clutching a mug of coffee she couldn't remember making. Her hands trembled. The scent of hazelnut and cream barely reached her. Her ears still echoed with Jenna's voice from the night before. "She's too smart. She's already been in the basement. If she talks..." She had the tape. She had proof. She could walk into any police department right now and hand it over. But the thought of Emily, 10 years old, delicate and bright, still carrying stuffed animals in her backpack and drawing stars on napkins froze her in place. Emily didn't know. And if Martha acted, if she spoke too soon, too loudly, Jenna and Isaac would bury her. And Emily would be lost in the crossfire. She stared at the family photo on the wall. It had been taken last Christmas, Isaac smiling stiffly. Jenna's eyes sharp and calculating, even then Emily in the center, her arms wrapped around her grandmother's waist. Martha had worn her red wool sweater that day. She remembered feeling proud. Now she felt like she was suffocating. At lunch, Jenna served salad. She didn't speak much. Her movements were slow, deliberate. There was a hollowness in her eyes that Martha hadn't seen before, an animalistic focus, watching, waiting. Isaac didn't come home that day. The clinic had a full schedule, or so the receptionist said. Martha picked at her food, appetite lost. She excused herself early and went to lie down. When she returned to the kitchen later that evening to take her blood pressure medication, the bottle was missing. She checked the drawer twice, then the bathroom cabinet, then her room. Gone. That night, she asked Jenna directly, "Have you seen my medicine?" Jenna looked up from her tablet surprised. "No, did you misplace it?" Martha held her gaze. "No, I've taken the same pill at the same time for years. I don't misplace it." Jenna shrugged. "Perhaps we should get your memory checked, just to be safe." The words hit like ice water. "Excuse me," Martha asked quietly. "I just meant," Jenna said, her voice light and sugar-coated. "You've been under stress lately. Forgetting things. Paranoid about files and basements. Isaac and I were talking. We think it might be time you saw someone." "A doctor." Jenna nodded. "A specialist, just a consultation. Cognitive baseline testing, nothing invasive." Martha's heart pounded in her chest. "You want me evaluated for dementia?" Jenna's smile didn't falter. "It's just precautionary. For everyone's peace of mind, especially Emily's." Martha didn't respond. She walked upstairs, closed the door behind her, and pressed her forehead to the wood, breathing hard. They were going to discredit her. Make her look unstable, build a file, one missed pill, one forgotten date, one emotional outburst, and they'd take it to court, paint her as a danger to herself, unfit to live unsupervised, perhaps even a risk to Emily. It wasn't a warning. It was a plan. She wanted to scream, to call someone, but who would believe her now? So instead, she sat down at her desk and took out the cassette. Labeled it Kitchen, 11:47 p.m., April 3rd. She placed it in the box beneath her socks alongside the patient files and the backup flash drive she'd started compiling. Then she cried. Not loud sobs, just the slow kind, quiet, tired tears that dripped down her face and soaked the collar of her sweater. The door creaked open. "Grandma, Emily." Martha quickly wiped her face and turned, forcing a smile. Emily stepped in barefoot, holding her plush rabbit in one hand. Her eyes widened when she saw her grandmother's face. "Were you crying?" Martha tried to wave it off. "Just tired, sweetheart. You always say that when you don't want to talk." There was no escaping her. Martha pulled her into a hug. Emily leaned in, resting her head on her grandmother's chest. "I'm scared," the little girl whispered. Martha's arms tightened. "Why?" "Because Daddy and Mommy keep whispering at night. And I heard Mommy say something about taking you away. And today, I saw you looking like someone died." Martha kissed her forehead. She didn't know what to say. What truth could a 10-year-old carry? "I'm okay, Emily," she said softly. Sometimes adults get scared too. Especially when they know too much about something they wish they didn't." Emily looked up, like a secret. Martha nodded. "Exactly. Is it a bad secret?" "Yes." Emily was quiet. Then she asked, "Will it hurt me?" That question broke something in Martha. "No," she whispered. "I won't let it." They stayed like that for a long time. Long after the hallway lights dimmed, long after Jenna passed by the door, pausing just long enough to listen. Later that night, Martha couldn't sleep. She sat by her window, staring into the dark garden. A wind chime jingled in the breeze. The black sedan didn't come that night, or maybe it did and she missed it. She picked up the phone. She dialed 911. Then her finger hovered over the green button and she stopped. If she called now and Isaac caught wind of it, he'd spin it. He'd say she was confused, delusional, that she'd been forgetting things, that she believed he was hiding corpses in the freezer. And with the missing pills and Jenna's notes on her behavior, it might just be enough. She couldn't risk it, not yet. She hung up. Instead, she picked up a notepad and began writing. Not a letter, a record, names, dates, events, what she heard, what she saw, a mother's testament not of guilt but of clarity. And in the final line, written in slightly shaking cursive, she wrote, "I am not confused, I am not forgetful. I am Martha Langley, and I see everything." Under the veil of morning mist, Martha slipped out of the house with a manila envelope tucked tightly beneath her coat. It wasn't a dramatic escape, not yet, but it was the beginning. She walked 3 blocks to the nearest mailbox, hands shaking slightly as she dropped the envelope into the chute. Her name wasn't on it, but the return address belonged to someone she hadn't spoken to in 17 years, Linda Vasquez. They had once worked together in Chicago, Martha as a nurse, Linda as a beat reporter covering hospital corruption and malpractice cases. They'd spent sleepless nights hunched over files, whispering through hospital corridors, exposing a ring of pharmaceutical kickbacks. Then life had pulled them in different directions. Children, divorce, cancer, retirement, silence. But Linda had stayed sharp. Still wrote for a medical watchdog blog, still had a reputation for sinking her teeth into whatever stank of blood and secrecy. Inside the envelope, 2 cassette tapes, photocopies of the patient files, a handwritten letter that ended with one request: "If I disappear, publish this," loudly. When Martha returned home, Jenna was waiting in the living room, her arms folded, her eyes glassy. On the table in front of her, a typed document with a pen already uncapped. "I need you to sign this," Jenna said. Martha glanced down. It was a formal agreement, clean, professional, legal. It stated that Martha Langley would vacate the premises of her own free will, citing health concerns and a desire for independence. In exchange, she would receive 6 months' worth of assisted living expenses conditional upon her signing that she had no grievances against the family or knowledge of any illegal activity. Martha stared at it. This isn't just a relocation agreement. Jenna didn't flinch. It's for your safety and ours. Martha sat down slowly. Why now? Jenna exhaled as if bored by the question. Because I'm done playing nice. You've been poking around where you shouldn't. And frankly, you've become unstable. That's not your diagnosis to make. Oh, but it is. You see, Isaac spoke with a specialist yesterday, someone who's already started documenting your decline. If you don't sign this, well, we'll have to involve Adult Protective Services. You're bluffing. Jenna smiled thinly. We've already scheduled the consultation, Monday morning, but if you sign that, we'll cancel it. You'll leave with your dignity, quietly. Martha stared at the pen, then at her own reflection in the polished glass of the coffee table, a woman with crow's feet, with silver hair and weary eyes, but not broken. Not yet. She took the pen. She signed it. Not because she believed in it, but because she needed time. She needed the pressure to lift. She needed them to think they'd won. Jenna snatched the paper back, folded it, and slipped it into her leather folio. You'll leave Friday morning, she said crisply. A car will come. Martha stood. One last dinner with Emily. Jenna nodded. Of course, we're not monsters. That night, Emily crawled into Martha's bed, her cheeks still damp from crying. She had overheard pieces, words no child should have to hear, leaving dementia not safe. Martha held her tight, the girl's heartbeat fluttering against her ribs. I don't want you to go, Emily whispered. I don't want to go either. Then don't. I have to, sweetheart, just for a little while. You're lying, Emily's voice cracked. If you leave, I'll never see you again. That's not true. You're scared of them. I see it. Martha's hand stroked the girl's hair. I'm scared for you. That's different. Emily looked up at her. I hear them whisper at night. I know something bad is happening. But if you go, I won't know who to trust. Martha leaned down, kissed her forehead, and said the only thing she could. Then listen to your heart, and one day when you're ready, come find me. Emily clung tighter. Promise me you'll be okay. Martha didn't answer right away. Then with a voice she barely recognized, she said, I will survive, Emily, for you. That night, long after Emily fell asleep, Martha sat in the dark watching the blinking cursor on her laptop screen. She opened a blank email and typed a single line. If anything happens to me, check the garden bench behind St. Mary's Chapel. Then she added Linda's name in the BCC, encrypted the message with an old passphrase, and saved it as a draft never sent, never seen unless she needed it. At 3:11 a.m., a black SUV pulled up outside the house. She watched it from the upstairs window. They weren't waiting until Friday. Under the veil of morning mist, Martha slipped out of the house with a manila envelope tucked tightly beneath her coat. It wasn't a dramatic escape, not yet, but it was the beginning. She walked 3 blocks to the nearest mailbox, hands shaking slightly as she dropped the envelope into the chute. Her name wasn't on it, but the return address belonged to someone she hadn't spoken to in 17 years, Linda Vasquez. They had once worked together in Chicago, Martha as a nurse, Linda as a beat reporter covering hospital corruption and malpractice cases. They'd spent sleepless nights hunched over files, whispering through hospital corridors, exposing a ring of pharmaceutical kickbacks. Then life had pulled them in different directions. Children, divorce, cancer, retirement, silence. But Linda had stayed sharp, still wrote for a medical watchdog blog, still had a reputation for sinking her teeth into whatever stank of blood and secrecy. Inside the envelope, 2 cassette tapes, photocopies of the patient files, a handwritten letter that ended with one request. If I disappear, publish this. Loudly. When Martha returned home, Jenna was waiting in the living room, her arms folded, her eyes glassy. On the table in front of her, a typed document with a pen already uncapped. I need you to sign this, Jenna said. Martha glanced down. It was a formal agreement, clean, professional, legal. It stated that Martha Langley would vacate the premises of her own free will, citing health concerns and a desire for independence. In exchange, she would receive 6 months' worth of assisted living expenses conditional upon her signing that she had no grievances against the family or knowledge of any illegal activity. Martha stared at it. This isn't just a relocation agreement. Jenna didn't flinch. It's for your safety and ours. Martha sat down slowly. Why now? Jenna exhaled as if bored by the question. Because I'm done playing nice. You've been poking around where you shouldn't. And frankly, you've become unstable. That's not your diagnosis to make. Oh, but it is. You see, Isaac spoke with a specialist yesterday, someone who's already started documenting your decline. If you don't sign this, well, we'll have to involve Adult Protective Services. You're bluffing. Jenna smiled thinly. We've already scheduled the consultation, Monday morning, but if you sign that, we'll cancel it. You'll leave with your dignity, quietly. Martha stared at the pen, then at her own reflection in the polished glass of the coffee table, a woman with crow's feet, with with silver hair and weary eyes, but not broken. Not yet. She took the pen. She signed it. Not because she believed in it, but because she needed time. She needed the pressure to lift. She needed them to think they'd won. Jenna snatched the paper back, folded it, and slipped it into her leather folio. "You'll leave Friday morning," she said crisply. "A car will come." Martha stood. "One last dinner with Emily." Jenna nodded. "Of course! We're not monsters." That night, Emily crawled into Martha's bed, her cheeks still damp from crying. She had overheard pieces. Words no child should have to hear, leaving dementia not safe. Martha held her tight, the girl's heartbeat fluttering against her ribs. "I don't want you to go," Emily whispered. "I don't want to go either." "Then don't." "I have to, sweetheart, just for a little while." "You're lying," Emily's voice cracked. "If you leave, I'll never see you again." "That's not true. You're scared of them. I see it." Martha's hand stroked the girl's hair. "I'm scared for you, that's different." Emily looked up at her. "I hear them whisper at night. I know something bad is happening, but if you go, I won't know who to trust." Martha leaned down, kissed her forehead, and said the only thing she could. "Then listen to your heart, and one day when you're ready, come find me." Emily clung tighter. "Promise me you'll be okay." Martha didn't answer right away. Then with a voice she barely recognized, she said, "I will survive, Emily. For you." That night, long after Emily fell asleep, Martha sat in the dark watching the blinking cursor on her laptop screen. She opened a blank email and typed a single line. "If anything happens to me, check the garden bench behind St. Mary's Chapel." Then she added Linda's name in the BCC, encrypted the message with an old passphrase, and saved it as a draft never sent, never seen unless she needed it. At 3:11 a.m., a black SUV pulled up outside the house. She watched it from the upstairs window. They weren't waiting until Friday. "Banda Noi, Beijio He Viet Yi, 35014110, Bien Ma Trong Bong Toi, Sudat Dang Len Song, Martha Bodhi Trong Dem Den Na Duong Lao Tin Le, Mo Tuan Sao Tin Tuk No Ra Duong De Pao Thua Chui Bitu Giak, Ningi Ken La Baxi Phao Thuat Noi Tieng, Isak Funan, Jenna Kang Din Mi Chong Biroi Loan, Bao Chibat Daun Ging Go, Voido Dai 1442, New Kong Dudo Dai 1442 The Kong Fan Hoi Lai Viet Phai Bam Sat Giani Va Dong Viet Lan Noi Dong Kua Fan Kak Ne, Tang Chu Sao Noi Dong Chuyen Yep Kang Truk Dien, Viet La Phai Ke Chuyen Quan Hu Chu Kong Liet Ke Hai Mota Hoi Hot, Viet Bang Tieng Me Theo Fong Kach Storytelling Mode Kong Kan Chu Dich Va Kong Viet Vao Fan Canvas. ChatGPT Denoy. Under the cloak of night, Martha left the only home she had known in years, not the house itself, but the people within it. The silence of the early hours gave her cover, and she moved like a ghost through the hallway, her bag light, her steps deliberate. She didn't look back at Emily's room, though her heart pulled her toward that door with an ache so violent she had to stop halfway down the stairs and breathe. One more glance and she might have undone everything. The car that had arrived at 3:11 a.m. had been meant to take her away quietly under Jenna's terms. But Martha had her own vehicle, an old Buick kept in storage by a friend from her church, the keys returned to her just 2 nights earlier. She drove through back roads, headlights dimmed, moving like a fugitive, though she hadn't committed a crime. By sunrise, she had crossed 2 counties and checked into the quietest facility she could find. St. Bridget's Assisted Living, tucked between a pine forest and a dried-out lake in the town of Litchfield. It wasn't luxurious. The wallpaper peeled slightly near the windows. The carpet smelled faintly of mothballs. But it was safe. No cameras, no Jenna, no Isaac. Martha used a false name, Margaret Lane, and paid up front in cash. The staff didn't ask questions. She spent her first days in seclusion, sleeping long hours, eating little, listening to birdsong through the mesh screen on her window. At night, she played the tapes back again, not because she needed to remember, but to reassure herself that the horror had been real and not a product of her aging imagination. And then exactly 6 days after she vanished, it began. The first headline came from an independent news blog. Whistleblower alleges underground surgery network involving prominent Connecticut surgeon. Linda had gone public. Within hours, the story exploded. Local stations ran the same footage on repeat, stock images of surgical tools, a blurred-out headshot of Isaac, and the voice of a reporter narrating the core details. A retired nurse had provided evidence of a covert operation involving illegal organ harvesting, unregistered patients, and ties to an overseas broker. The tapes were not played, but their content was referenced discussions of sealed product phrases like shipment to Turkey and keeping the organs clean. The transcripts were damning. The medical board issued a temporary suspension of Isaac's license pending investigation. Reporters swarmed outside his clinic by noon. At 4:22 p.m., Isaac appeared in a press suit and tired eyes, flanked by his attorney. "I deny all allegations made against me," he said, voice steady. "I have dedicated my career to saving lives, not destroying them. I will cooperate fully with the investigation and clear my name." That same evening, Jenna went on a local news interview via Zoom, seated in her sunlit living room with a forced calm and a subtle smile. My mother-in-law, Martha Langley, has a long history of cognitive issues, she said sweetly. She's been paranoid for years, writing letters to strangers, recording private family conversations, claiming things that never happened. She's struggling with age-related confusion. This fantasy she's constructed is sad but not criminal. When asked if she had ever heard anything unusual in their home, Jenna shook her head without hesitation. No, she said, we are a loving professional family, and this has broken our hearts. By the end of the week, news stations were split. Some painted Isaac as a once brilliant surgeon caught in a smear campaign orchestrated by a jealous and mentally deteriorating mother. Others looked closer. A whistleblower nurse from the hospital where Isaac had trained stepped forward anonymously, claiming he once overheard Isaac arguing with a supplier over delivering organs in coolers instead of sterile wraps. The story caught national attention. By day 8, the FBI opened an official investigation. Reporters began seeking out Martha. Where was she? Was she real? Was she alive? Martha stayed quiet. She watched from the safety of St. Bridget's rec room, the television volume low, her cardigan pulled tight around her. A staff member, Jenny Kind, and no older than 30, brought her tea every afternoon without fail. Jenny never asked about the headlines. Until one night, after a particularly breathless CNN update, Jenny sat beside her and said, "You don't have to be afraid anymore." Martha's eyes filled. "I'm not afraid," she whispered. "I'm grieving." She missed Emily like oxygen. And even in the firestorm she'd lit, her heart cracked open every time she saw her granddaughter's face on the news blurred in the background of a family photo always framed by Jenna's narrative of stability and victimhood. But she had chosen this. Silence, solitude, anonymity. Because the truth needed space to breathe. And right now the world was gasping for it. Later that night in her small room with the rust-stained radiator, Martha took out her recorder and pressed play one more time. And she said, "If your mother talks, she ruins everything." The tape clicked softly to its end. And Martha whispered into the stillness, "I am talking now, and the world is finally listening." Under the watchful eyes of federal agents, a storm had begun to gather quietly at first, like a low tide pulling back before it strikes with devastating force. A special unit of the FBI's Medical Crimes Division had been mobilized. Files were being cross-checked, surveillance warrants issued, clinic footage from Isaac Langley's surgical facility was subpoenaed. But it wasn't until one piece of evidence arrived quietly through a trusted reporter's encrypted Dropbox that the wheels turned in earnest. The package was stamped anonymously, but inside was the original unedited cassette recording from Martha Langley. A copy of her handwritten note, a list of names and dates. But most damning of all, references to 3 surgical cases from 5 years earlier, all involving middle-aged male patients with no next of kin, all who died of complications during routine procedures at a private wellness center Isaac once co-managed. The deaths had long been ruled unfortunate, but not suspicious until now. Inside the envelope was a detail only someone on the inside could have known: the missing post-op consent forms and undocumented anesthesia logs. The journalist Linda Vasquez knew exactly what she had. She published a second piece that same night. Exclusive leaked recordings point to illegal transplant deaths tied to respected surgeons' past. Within hours, the FBI reclassified the investigation. No longer a potential ethics violation. Now it was manslaughter with intent. In her quiet room at St. Bridget's, Martha received the call at 6:41 a.m. from a restricted number. "Martha Langley?" She hesitated before answering. "Who's asking?" "This is Agent Darnell, FBI Medical Crime Division. We have reviewed materials provided to us through a protected source. Your testimony is being formally requested. We can arrange secure transfer and witness protection." Martha paused. "You know where I am?" "No, and unless you give consent, we won't, but we need your voice. On the record." She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. Instead, she turned to look out the window where morning light stretched across the pine trees. The sky was soft blue, and a single bird perched on the feeder just outside her screen. If she stepped into the light, she'd be marked. Jenna would retaliate. Isaac might crumble or worse, lash out in desperation. But if she stayed in hiding, the system might twist the story just enough to make her the unstable, grieving matriarch they needed her to be. She reached for her notebook and began to write. Meanwhile, across Connecticut, the public was beginning to fracture. Some still believed the Langley family was under siege from a vengeful old woman with delusions. Others began questioning how one woman estranged alone could fabricate such a complex, medically accurate web of corruption. That was when the letter arrived. It wasn't part of the investigation. It wasn't even sent to the police. It showed up on the desk of a local morning show host, a segment usually reserved for pet adoptions and school charity fairs. The envelope was pink, the handwriting uneven, a child's. Inside was a letter printed on lined notebook paper, written in pencil. "My name is Emily Langley. I am 10. Everyone says my grandma is crazy, but she's not. We used to bake apple pies, and she told me secrets like how to fold the crust and how you can hear if a pie is done by the way it breathes when it cools. She would never lie. She's the only grown-up who listens to me without looking at her phone. If she's gone, it's because someone scared her. I miss her. Please tell her that. Attached was a photo of the two of them in the kitchen, Martha in an apron, her arms dusted with flour, Emily perched on the counter holding a spoon and grinning. The letter was aired that morning. Within hours, it had gone viral. Find Martha Langley began trending. A GoFundMe for whistleblower legal defense was created. Donations from nurses, medical students, and mothers across the country poured in. Suddenly, the narrative was shifting. Martha Langley wasn't the unreliable elderly accuser anymore. She was the woman who once taught her granddaughter that pies could breathe, that secrets should be shared, not buried, that love is in the details, even in the smallest truths. And now she was the missing voice in a national scandal. At the FBI's temporary field office in Hartford, Agent Darnell received word that Martha had sent a second encrypted message. This one wasn't addressed to him directly, but to Linda Vasquez. The subject line was 5 words long. I'm ready to speak now. Under a rain-streaked sky and wrapped in a coat 2 sizes too big, Emily Langley stood outside the wrought iron gate of St. Bridget's Assisted Living. Her pink sneakers soaked, her backpack clutched tightly in one hand. She had taken a bus, alone, from a stop near her school. She'd told no one, left a note in her math book, I'm going to find Grandma. Don't call the police. I'm safe. Love, Emily. The receptionist didn't know what to do at first. Children didn't wander into elder care homes, especially not with tear-stained cheeks and a voice shaking as she asked, Is Martha Langley here, please? I think she's hiding here. Jenny, the nurse who had cared for Martha quietly since her arrival, read the name, read the girl's eyes, and simply nodded. She's in room 214, sweetheart. Go. Emily ran. Her footsteps echoed through the corridor like a heartbeat, and when she reached the door, she didn't knock. She burst through it, breathless. Martha dropped the book in her lap. For a long second, neither of them moved. Then the girl ran, and the old woman opened her arms wide, and they met in the middle with a sound no language could describe, a collapse of grief, joy, fear, and love in one thunderous sob. Emily, you didn't tell me goodbye, the girl cried. I couldn't. I waited. Every day. They kept saying you were sick, that you made it all up. But I knew. I knew. Martha held her face searched. It felt every year of her life collapse beneath the weight of this child's belief. How did you find me? You told me, about the chapel bench, about the town where the river bends. You always said if you disappeared, that's where you'd go. So I looked on Google Maps, I found it, and I came. Martha's voice broke. You brave, brave girl. I couldn't stay there. Daddy and Mommy. Her voice caught. They fight all the time now. She calls him a coward. He says she ruined everything. They don't talk at dinner. Mommy slammed a plate yesterday and said, Your crazy mother burned it all down. I didn't want to be there anymore. They sat on the bed, hands locked. Grandma, Emily whispered, You were right, weren't you? Martha didn't answer immediately. She looked down at her hands. They trembled slightly more from the storm inside her than the age in her bones. I did what I thought was right, she finally said, but I never wanted it to break the whole house. But they did that, Emily said, fierce now. Not you. You didn't lie. No, I told the truth. But sometimes truth is like fire. It lights the way, but it also burns. Emily nestled into her shoulder. I don't care. I still want to be where the light is. That undid her. Because somewhere in her heart, even after the evidence and the tapes and the testimonies, Martha had begun to wonder, had I gone too far? Had I pulled a pin that should have stayed buried? Had I traded my son for justice? My family for a confession? But now in this moment, she understood if the family was broken, it was because it had been rotten from the inside. She hadn't shattered it. She had just pulled the curtain back. Still doubt crept in. Emily, she whispered, do you think I destroyed your home? The girl pulled away just enough to look her in the eyes. No, she said with steady certainty. They were the ones destroying it. You just stopped them. That night, Jenny brought 2 extra bowls of soup and warm cornbread. They sat at the small round table near the window, 3 generations of womanhood linked by truth, defiance, and scars. Later, after Emily fell asleep under Martha's old quilt, Martha sat in the dark with a tape recorder and began to speak. April 27th. Emily is here. Somehow she found me, and for the first time since this all began, I remember who I am. Not a whistleblower, not a runaway, a grandmother, a mother, a woman who still believes that silence never saved a soul. Outside, the rain stopped. Inside, something fragile but unbreakable had begun to mend. At precisely 5:06 a.m., a line of unmarked vehicles slid silently into the cul-de-sac on Ash Grove Lane, their headlights off, their presence quiet but commanding. The sun had not yet broken the edge of the Connecticut sky, but the suburban calm of New Haven was about to erupt. The Langley estate, the sprawling ivy-wrapped house once revered as the seat of a respected medical family, was surrounded. 12 agents, 3 warrants, 1 truth. The front door was opened without force. Isaac Langley himself answered, shirt-wrinkled eyes bloodshot, as if he had been awake all night anticipating this. Dr. Langley, Agent Darnell said calmly, holding up the warrant. Federal search under Title 18, Code 2340, step aside. Isaac didn't resist, but behind his silence was a man collapsing inward. The officers moved quickly, clearing the main floor, sweeping the upstairs ceiling off the study, but the real focus was the basement. The door had always been locked. Jenna had always claimed it was under renovation, unsafe, filled with toxic cleaning chemicals, a lie she'd repeated with practiced smoothness. But the truth had been waiting in the dark. Down the narrow staircase, the air grew colder, damper. The smell was sterile mechanical bleach and metal. The hum of refrigeration units echoed faintly. And then the light snapped on. What they found was not a storeroom or a janitorial space. It was a fully outfitted surgical suite. An examination table stained, a portable anesthesia rig unplugged but intact, multiple storage coolers, a locked metal cabinet, dozens of surgical implements wrapped in blue cloth as if awaiting the next procedure. The camera system was wired into a digital recorder half full. On the wall, a whiteboard. Names, dates, symbols, one entry underlined twice HT, May 4, export pending. It took only 20 minutes to secure the room, 40 to extract the hard drives and document everything. By 7:02 a.m., the evidence chain had begun. Isaac Langley was seated on the back porch surrounded by 3 agents. He said nothing, didn't ask for a lawyer, just stared at his hands. But the real shift came later that afternoon when a man named Thomas Rayner walked into Hartford General Hospital's ER and asked for a nurse. He was thin, pale, trembling, but lucid. "I think I need to talk to someone," he said, "about what was taken from me." His medical records would later confirm it. 5 years earlier, Rayner had undergone a routine detox procedure at the wellness clinic co-owned by Isaac Langley. He'd gone under anesthesia for a simple fluid flush. He woke up days later disoriented, discharged. At the time, he thought the strange pain in his side was from an IV. He'd been assured the swelling would pass. It didn't. A month ago, during a checkup at a different hospital, he learned he only had one functioning kidney. The other had been surgically removed. He had never been a donor, never signed consent, never knew. But when he saw Martha Langley's story on the news and the transcript of the whispered phrase, "clean incision," package ready, something inside him cracked. And now he was speaking. The scar, he told investigators, it was too clean. It wasn't a street job, it was professional. I thought maybe I was paranoid until I saw the photo of the basement table on TV. That was the room. That was where they did it. With Rayner's testimony and the physical evidence collected from the basement, the FBI had what they needed. By 9:48 p.m., Isaac Langley was arrested. The charges would multiply over the next few weeks: illegal organ harvesting, involuntary medical experimentation, medical fraud, conspiracy to commit aggravated assault. But one name was notably missing from the arrest list. Jenna? She had vanished. Agents had found her cell phone smashed in the bathroom sink. Her bank accounts were empty, her car abandoned in a parking garage 2 towns over. Whether she had fled the country or was simply biding her time in the shadows, no one could say. But Martha knew. She was always the one with the exit plan, she told Agent Darnell later. Isaac, he just followed her in the dark. For days afterward, news outlets replayed the footage of the basement. The story became national. Talk shows debated how a decorated surgeon could live a double life. Experts analyzed the psychological profiles of silent enablers and charismatic sociopaths. But for Emily, it wasn't about psychology. It was about seeing her father on the screen, handcuffed, head bowed. It was about hearing a stranger say, "They took my kidney," and knowing her family's kitchen had once been just a floor above that table. And for Martha, it was a hollow victory. The truth had come to light. Justice had started to move, but nothing about it felt triumphant. Because when the monsters live under your own roof, even the truth feels like betrayal. Under the high ceilings of the Superior Court of New Haven, the air was brittle thick with unsaid things trembling beneath the weight of truth yet to be spoken aloud. The courtroom was packed. Press sat shoulder to shoulder with legal interns, retired nurses, and silent family members of patients whose names had been buried in Isaac Langley's hidden ledgers. And at the center of it all, Martha Langley, wearing a navy coat that didn't hide the way her hands shook when she rose to the witness stand. She took her oath with a calmness she didn't feel, then turned to face the courtroom and the woman she once thought of as family. Jenna Langley sat coolly beside her defense attorney's spine-straight legs, crossed the picture of composure. She wore a tailored gray suit, not black, refusing the theater of mourning. When Martha looked at her, Jenna did not blink. Her expression didn't soften. When it was Jenna's turn to speak, she stood with slow deliberation. Her voice was cold, precise. "She's not my mother-in-law," she said, nodding toward Martha. "She's a woman whose delusions nearly destroyed a family, a woman whose accusations are rooted in bitterness, isolation, and a long history of mental decline. She wasn't invited into our lives. She inserted herself, then tore everything down." Martha's heart clenched, but she didn't interrupt. "She was never one of us." Jenna continued, her eyes narrowing slightly, not in the way that mattered. "And as for her claims of moral righteousness, I'll remind the court this woman has no medical degree. She's not a professional. She's a relic. and in the modern world, relics are dangerous. The prosecutor objected to the last statement as character assassination, and the judge sustained it. But Jenna had already said what she came to say. And in that moment, something broke wide open, not in Martha, but in the room. Because despite Jenna's ice-cold articulation, there was something off. Something a jury could feel, the calculated edge of a woman who'd rehearsed her cruelty. Then Jenna's lawyer presented the so-called medical file, a document stamped with hospital letterhead alleging Martha had been diagnosed with early-stage dementia months before her disappearance. The paper outlined paranoid delusions, erratic behavior, and emotional instability. A supposed consult note from a psychiatrist who had allegedly seen Martha twice. "This is manufactured," Martha whispered to her own attorney, but her voice was drowned by the rustle of papers and shifting jurors. Until the prosecution's next move. They called Louise Martin to the stand. A retired nurse, former colleague of Isaac Langley, and once quietly Martha's friend. She walked slowly but stood tall, gripping the railing with knotted hands. "I was there," Louise said, when Jenna Langley came into the hospital records office asking for access to restricted patient files. Said she was doing early prep for her mother-in-law's care. "I didn't trust her." Louise paused, turned toward the jury. "She offered me money to sign off on a pre-written report, said it would help keep an old woman from hurting herself and the family. I refused, and when I refused, she went to someone else." The courtroom fell dead silent. Louise looked directly at Jenna, her voice hardening. "You lied, Jenna, and now you're caught." Jenna's jaw tightened, but her eyes flicked just for a moment toward the exit doors. Then came the most unexpected moment of the morning. The prosecutor introduced a small handwritten letter into evidence. It was folded into a plastic sleeve, its lines slightly faded. "Permission to read," he asked the judge. Granted, the judge nodded. The prosecutor held it up. "Written by a minor, admissible under indirect testimony as corroborative character evidence, dated 3 weeks ago." He cleared his throat. "Dear Judge, my name is Emily Langley. I'm 10 years old. I used to live with my grandma. People say she's sick in the head. She's not. She always knew when I was lying. That's how I know she never did. She tells the truth even when it hurts, even when it made me cry. If she says something bad happened, then it happened. Because she would never say it unless it did. And that's what I wanted to tell you, thank you." The jury shifted. Somebody in the back row sniffed. A woman near the front dabbed her eyes. Martha stared at her hands. She didn't cry. She didn't have to. Because in that letter, every year of her life had been validated. She had been told she was imagining things, that she was vengeful, senile, fragile. But now her granddaughter, without being prompted, without being told how to help, had spoken the truth in the simplest words anyone had ever said. The judge recessed for lunch. Outside the courtroom, Jenna stood with her attorney, her cool beginning to unravel. "She's playing the victim," Jenna hissed. "They always believe the old woman and the child." But no one responded. Because now it wasn't just testimony, it wasn't just documents or recordings or whiteboards filled with names. It was character. And in this courtroom, character was everything. Under a heavy autumn sky, the color of steel, the verdict was read. The courtroom was silent, not the kind of quiet that comes from order, but the kind that holds its breath. Isaac Langley, once celebrated as Connecticut's golden scalpel, stood in a dark suit that no longer seemed to fit him. His hands clasped, his expression hollow. He didn't blink when the judge said, 18 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole, permanent revocation of medical license in all U.S. jurisdictions, and permanent inclusion in the Federal Criminal Registry for medical fraud and human rights violations. His lips parted just slightly, but no words came out. Martha sat 2 rows behind him, Emily's small hand wrapped around hers. The court did not cheer. This wasn't a moment of triumph. It was the confirmation of a slow horror, one that wore a doctor's coat, hosted backyard barbecues, and tucked a child into bed at night. Then came the second sentencing. Jenna Langley had been apprehended at the Canadian border, attempting to cross using a fake passport under the name Lillian Myers. Her hair had been dyed black. Her luggage held burner phones, $14,000 in cash, and a collection of forged identification documents. She did not resist arrest. She simply asked the officer, "Do you have any proof that I did anything more than keep a secret?" But it wasn't about silence anymore. The courtroom listened as prosecutors outlined her role not just as Isaac's partner, but as the one who negotiated with foreign contacts, who booked surgeries off record, who altered post-op logs, and who had manufactured psychiatric reports to silence the only witness who spoke out. The judge looked her dead in the eye. 12 years, he said, "for your role in conspiracy, insurance fraud, obstruction of justice, and endangering human life through medical malpractice." Jenna didn't flinch, but her smile, sharp and practiced, finally faded. The public response was immediate. Medical boards across the region were forced to open internal audits. A half-dozen administrators at private clinics where Isaac had once consulted were suspended pending investigation. The American Medical Ethics Council issued a statement within hours. "We are horrified by the violations committed under the guise of care. Dr. Langley's actions are not merely criminal, they are a betrayal of trust at the deepest level. We are undertaking a nationwide review of organ transplant protocols, whistleblower protections, and internal reporting structures. News outlets looped footage of the basement table, the surgical lights, the freezer units. But what gripped the public more than anything was a photo snapped outside the courthouse, Martha Langley, face pale but resolute, walking hand in hand with her granddaughter. The caption read simply, "Truth even when late still matters." Letters poured into her care facility, survivors of botched surgeries, retired nurses who once feared speaking out, mothers who had lost loved ones and never understood why the records didn't match the bodies. Martha didn't reply to every message, but she read them all. One came from a woman in Arizona. "My brother died in Isaac's clinic in 2019. They said it was a stroke, but now I wonder. Thank you for making me wonder. Thank you for not being quiet." Meanwhile, Emily returned to school. At first, other students whispered, "That's the girl whose dad is in prison." But that passed, because Emily didn't cower. She answered questions with quiet honesty. She joined the writing club. She submitted a short story titled "The Apple Pie That Knew the Truth." And in the hallway outside her classroom hung a drawing, a small cottage with a woman and child at the window, a pie cooling on the sill. The caption, "Not all heroes wear capes, some wear aprons." Months later, during a televised roundtable on medical ethics and legal responsibility, a former prosecutor was asked, "Do you believe the justice system worked in the Langley case?" He paused. "We didn't get them all," he admitted, "but we got the ones that mattered. And more importantly, we proved that sometimes the most fragile voices, an elderly woman, a 10-year-old girl, can shake the walls of a house built on silence." Justice had come. It had come late. It had come hard. But it had come. Under a softer sky and with the courtroom storm now behind them, life did not return to normal. But it did begin to breathe again. For the time being, Emily was allowed to live with Martha under a court-ordered temporary custody arrangement. The hearings for full guardianship would come later after psychological evaluations and family services investigations. But for now, just now, they were together. Legally. Without having to explain themselves every hour. The cottage Martha had moved into, tucked behind a small lake on the outskirts of Branford, wasn't grand. It had one bedroom, one fold-out couch, and a garden in the back that hadn't bloomed in years. But Emily didn't seem to mind. She made a list of things to fix, to paint, to plant. "We need marigolds," she said, "and tomatoes, and that tiny kind of lettuce that curls at the edge." Martha pretended to scoff. "What do I look like, a farmer?" Emily smirked. "No, you look like someone who's trying not to be lonely anymore." That night, they cooked together. Not for survival, not as a chore, but as a ritual. A way to claim space again. Martha peeled apples with the same blade she'd once used to slice fear away from her own tongue. Emily rolled dough with small, sure hands. After dinner, they sat outside, a lantern flickering beside them. Emily leaned into her grandmother's shoulder. "I think about Mom sometimes," she said, voice so soft Martha barely caught it. Like, was she always like that? Or did something break in her? Martha didn't have easy answers. She never did. But she said some people confuse control with love. Your mother thought if she could just manage every detail, nobody would ever leave her. But the problem is, people aren't puzzles. You don't get to force the pieces to fit. Emily was quiet. Then, "Did it hurt losing her?" Martha swallowed. "Yes," she said, "but not the way you think. It wasn't sudden. It was like watching someone build a wall between us, brick by brick, and you shout through it for years hoping they'll stop. But one day you realize they can't hear you anymore." Emily nodded. "I didn't lose you," she said. "Even when everyone told me you were sick or lying, I didn't believe them." And then the words that stopped Martha's breath. "I lost my mom, but I never lost my grandma." The weight of that washed over her like grace. And for the first time in months, maybe years, Martha didn't feel like the ghost of herself. Days passed. They fell into rhythm. Emily went to school. Martha started walking into town again. She visited the library. At first just to borrow books, then to volunteer. And finally, when the director mentioned a literacy program that needed someone with warmth and patience, Martha said almost without thinking, "I could read to the kids." The following week, she sat in a circle of mismatched beanbags and read The Velveteen Rabbit to a group of 6-year-olds. Halfway through, one child asked, "Did the rabbit get thrown away?" Martha smiled. "No," she said, "he was made real because someone loved him." When she looked up, Emily was standing near the door, her backpack still on her eyes glinting. At home that night, Martha opened an old journal she had stopped writing in the day she fled her son's house. She picked up a pen. March 6th. "I made apple pie with Emily again. She's learning how to crimp the edges. It doesn't always stick, but it doesn't have to. The world doesn't feel safe yet. Not really, but it feels possible. I'm learning that healing doesn't mean erasing. It means holding the wound without letting it bleed into everything else. I lost a daughter, but I have a granddaughter. And she's teaching me how to begin again." Outside, the wind picked up, A storm was likely on its way. But inside, beneath a handmade quilt and beside a stack of library books, two women from two different generations slept side by side, proof that family, when chosen freely and held with truth, could still grow something honest out of wreckage. Under the first full sunlight of early spring, the soil behind Martha's cottage finally softened enough to be turned. It had been Emily's idea to plant something real, something that couldn't be faked or silenced or buried like the truth had been for so long. They started small: lavender, cherry, tomatoes, rosemary, and a row of sunflowers along the fence. Martha wore a wide-brimmed straw hat she'd once used on camping trips with Isaac, before he became the man whose choices she would one day help unravel. Emily dug the holes with a small trowel, her knees muddy, her hair tied back with a ribbon from an old birthday gift. "Gardens don't grow right away," she said, repeating something she'd heard in school. "You have to keep showing up." Martha smiled. "That's true for people too." They worked in silence for a while, and then Emily asked out of the blue, "Do you think the people who got hurt will ever heal?" Martha paused, brushing dirt from her hands. "Some will," she said quietly. "Others might carry it forever. But healing doesn't always mean forgetting. Sometimes it just means you've decided to stop bleeding." That afternoon, as they finished the last row, a woman arrived at the garden gate. She was in her early 40s, her blouse wrinkled like she'd traveled far. She looked nervous, hands wringing the strap of a leather purse. Emily stepped forward, but Martha raised a gentle hand. She knew this look. Knew it from years at hospital waiting rooms, from grief counseling groups after her husband's death. It was the look of someone with something caught between their heart and their mouth. "Are you Mrs. Langley?" the woman asked. "I am." The woman nodded, eyes moist. "I'm sorry for just showing up. I asked around town, someone said you read to kids at the library. I had to find you." Martha stepped closer. "Is everything all right?" The woman opened her purse, pulled out a photo. A young man, maybe 23. Pale, thin eyes, too wide. "My son, Jacob. He had a seizure 2 years ago. Was referred to your son's clinic. They said he needed exploratory surgery. Something didn't add up. I backed out. I got scared." Her voice broke. "I read about the trial, the victims, the recordings, and then I saw the list of patients whose surgeries were canceled last minute. Jacob's name was on it." Silence sat heavy between them. "I think, if I hadn't panicked that day, he wouldn't be here now. I owe you his life." Martha didn't know what to say. The woman reached into her purse again, this time with trembling hands, and pulled out a small jar. "Apricot jam," she said. "My grandmother's recipe. It's not much, but I didn't know how else to say thank you." Martha took the jar, held it like it was glass, because maybe it was. "Thank you," she whispered. The woman lingered a moment, then turned and left. That evening, after Emily had fallen asleep, Martha sat on the porch. The garden shimmered under moonlight. The rosemary leaves caught the breeze like quiet prayers. The jam sat on the table beside her. She flipped through a small notebook Emily had started, their garden journal. On one page, the girl had drawn a picture of grandmother and granddaughter kneeling beside a sunflower. Above it, written in pencil, "Things we planted: tomatoes, lavender, hope." Martha smiled. She hadn't asked for this second chapter. She hadn't planned for it. But maybe, just maybe, that was the point. 2 days later, a reporter came by. Young, polite, nervous. Said he was from a regional magazine doing a feature called Profiles in Quiet Courage. He carried a printout of the article being finalized. The headline read, "The Silent Whistleblower: How a Retired Grandmother Brought Down a Medical Empire." "I wanted you to see it first," he said. "We won't run it without your blessing." Martha read in silence. The facts were accurate. The tone was respectful. But what struck her most was one line buried halfway through. Martha Langley never raised her voice, but she raised the truth. She looked up. "Run it," she said. The story went viral within 48 hours. Online comments poured in: survivors, healthcare workers, daughters, sons, whistleblowers in hiding. One wrote, "Your bravery is a map. Thank you for showing us how not to disappear." Later that night, Emily handed Martha a small envelope. Inside was a note scribbled in crayon. "Dear Grandma, when the flowers come up, let's give one to everyone who lost someone, so they know something still grows. Love, Emily." Martha folded the note slowly, pressed it to her chest. Outside, the garden waited. And beneath the soil, something true was learning how to bloom. Under a courthouse ceiling that still smelled of wood polish and inked paperwork, the final gavel fell. The judge's voice was calm but clear. "The court hereby grants permanent custody of Emily Langley to her paternal grandmother, Martha Langley, citing the biological mother's criminal conviction, psychological manipulation, and willful endangerment of a minor." Emily didn't cry. She just exhaled like a balloon untied from years of knots. Beside her, Martha's fingers trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight finally sliding off her spine. She had been waiting, not just for this verdict, but for some kind of exhale to justify every moment she'd stayed silent when it was safest to scream. Outside, the media waited, cameras blinked, reporters reached forward with recorders and clipboards. But Martha walked past them, her hand tightly holding Emily's. Neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. The truth had already spoken. Weeks later, the rhythm of this new life settled into place, not with ceremony, but with small, steady beats. School lunches packed with handwritten notes, bedtime stories chosen in rotation, and garden tools resting muddy beside the back door. And then something neither of them expected: a trip. Martha had been invited to speak at a retreat for whistleblowers and reformers in education, healthcare, and government. It would take place at a wooded camp in New Hampshire, something halfway between summer getaway and trauma workshop. At first, she declined, but Emily overheard the call. "You should go," the girl said plainly. "You always tell me brave doesn't mean loud, so just go be quiet and brave." And so they did. It was Martha's first time outside of New Haven in nearly 6 years. The camp sat along the curve of a lake, the water calm like a truth that had nowhere left to hide. They stayed in a cabin with 2 bunk beds, a fan that ticked at night, and a window that opened to wind chimes and pine. Emily made fast friends with 3 other girls, too, whose parents had been part of activism lawsuits, one who simply liked trees more than people. Martha sat in the library cabin talking with a nurse who'd exposed falsified cancer trials in Ohio and a former state clerk who'd uncovered voter suppression data. But it wasn't the talks that stayed with her. It was what happened late one afternoon just after the rain stopped. Emily found an old tape recorder in the storytelling lodge. "What's this?" she asked. Martha smiled and took it gently from her hands. "That," she said, "is the first thing I trusted when I didn't trust anyone." She clicked the eject button. The cassette inside was labeled in shaky handwriting, Nova 12 Kitchen. Emily held it like it was ancient treasure. "How do you use it?" Martha didn't answer right away. Instead, she sat down beside her granddaughter, plugged in a fresh tape, and gently placed the microphone on the table between them. "It's simple," she said. "You press this red button to record, and when you're done, you press stop." Emily nodded. Martha leaned in, her voice soft but ironclad. "But what matters isn't the buttons, it's why you're pressing them." Emily tilted her head. Martha looked her in the eyes. "Because truth," she said, "doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be remembered." And then she placed the recorder in Emily's hands. The girl pressed the button. A soft click. Silence. Then Emily's voice, small and clear. "My name is Emily Langley, and this is for anyone who ever got told to forget." They didn't talk much after that. Some truths are best left to sit. And that night, under a sky littered with stars, the recorder rested between them like a promise they didn't have to make out loud. When they returned to Brantford, the garden had bloomed in their absence. Sunflowers taller than Emily leaned toward the windows, tomatoes clung in clusters, and the rosemary had split into 2 wide arms like it had waited all summer to be noticed. They unpacked slowly. Martha placed the tape recorder on a shelf beside her cookbooks, and Emily, now taller, now firmer in voice, placed a label on the side. "For remembering." Because that's what life had become now: not a fight, not a secret, not even a survival story, but a living record of 2 people linked not by tragedy but by the unspoken vow to never bury what matters. And in that house, small, quiet, filled with fresh air and open windows, the truth would never be silenced again. Under the gentle light of a late spring afternoon, with bees tracing lazy arcs around the lavender bushes outside her window, Martha sat at her writing desk, a piece of furniture older than her son, older than the marriage that once defined her, perhaps even older than her grief. The cassette recorder, now dusty but dependable, waited quietly beside a worn-out tape labeled simply "Final Entry." Her fingers hesitated over the red button, as if acknowledging that once she pressed it, a chapter would close not with fanfare or applause, but with truth. She leaned forward and pressed record. Her voice, though older, was steady. "Emily, if you're hearing this, it means I finally found peace with all the noise that came before. I want you to know this story didn't begin with courage. It began with silence. A silence I wore like armor for too long, hoping to protect a son who had long stopped being the boy I raised." She paused, the sound of birdsong filling the background. "I didn't choose to expose Isaac because I hated him. I chose it because there are other sons out there, other daughters, other lives that deserve a chance at tomorrow. Silence would have been easier, but easier isn't always right." Another pause. Then, "You once asked me if telling the truth meant destroying our family, and I said yes, maybe. But some things, some families must be burned down before anything honest can be built again." The tape rolled on as she closed her eyes and let her voice soften into a whisper. "You are the reason I never vanished completely. Your hand in mine kept me anchored when everything else tried to erase me. And one day when I'm no longer beside you, I hope you'll remember this: the truth does not require permission, only protection." She stopped the tape. And for the first time in a long while, Martha Langley exhaled without weight. Years passed. The cottage remained, though the rosemary had overtaken the left edge of the porch. The garden expanded, and a small wooden sign now stood beside the front gate: "Emily's Grove. Truth takes root here." Inside the house was quieter now. Martha had aged gracefully but visibly. Her hands bore the stories of time, and her back, once straight with defiance, curved gently with rest. Emily, now 16, stood at the same writing desk, taller, stronger, but with the same fire behind her eyes. She had found the cassette last night final entry. She listened to it in full, her headphones tucked in, tears quietly staining the corners of her pillow. She didn't cry because it was sad, she cried because it was honest. And now, holding a new tape in her hands, she clicked it into the recorder and pressed the red button. Her voice was bright younger but laced with something ancient. My name is Emily Langley. I'm 16, and this is my first entry in what I hope will be a long, messy, brave record of the life I'm still learning to live. A small chuckle. My grandma says the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be remembered. So I'm going to remember everything. She talked about her day, her dreams, her fears, the way she still looks over her shoulder at school expecting to see her mother's car, the way she sometimes wonders if Isaac ever loved her at all. And then quietly, but I'm okay, because I have her, and her truth taught me how to build my own. Outside, the sun began to lower behind the trees. The air smelled like lilacs and late promises. Martha stepped out onto the porch holding 2 cups of tea. Emily joined her, barefoot, recorder in hand. Done already? Martha asked. Just started. They sat in silence for a while, sipping slowly, listening to the breeze cut through the wind chimes. Then, with unspoken agreement, they stood and began walking down the dirt path that led toward the woods behind their home, a trail Martha once walked alone, now softened by years of shared footsteps. Wildflowers stretched along the roadside, yellow, white, violet, a choir of resilience. As they walked, the camera pulls back high above the trees, catching the sun as it settles behind them. 2 figures, one older, one growing, but both moving forward. And beneath their feet, the ground no longer whispered secrets. It welcomed every step.